Welcome to the Everyday Ministry Podcast, where ministers get together to discuss everyday ministry.
I'm lost without your love. This life can feel so cold.
Welcome to the Everyday Ministry Podcast. We are a podcast where ministers get together to discuss ministry. And this is James. And unfortunately, on this recording, we don't have Daniel and Corey. They both were busy with school and work and whatnot. But to be able to record this episode with Ryan John, we had to do it today. So I figured I would record with him, and then they will be back on next time that we record. So as we get into this, Ryan, if you would, just go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey guys, hope you're doing all right. James, appreciate you having me on and for the podcast. But my name is Ryan John, and I am a contemporary worship leader, and that's what I do for living. I'm full-time worship leader, both at my church, First Baptist Opelika, which is right outside, for those of you who don't know, right outside Auburn, Alabama, in Opelika, Alabama. First Baptist Opelika. I'm full-time contemporary worship there, and then I'm also on the road, and I travel and lead worship at camps and conferences, D-Nows, that kind of thing. So that's the world that I live in.
So I have to ask you this, and then I'm going to ask you a few more questions about yourself. Are you a Auburn Tigers fan?
Oh, absolutely. Or Eagle. I don't know. I mean, it's in my blood. So I had a buddy when I first was in Alabama. He was in his family's Alabama fans, and he went through just a short period where, for whatever reason, he pulled for Auburn, and that's when I met him. And so during that time, I kind of fell in love with just the Auburn way of life and the Auburn family. And so I was stuck. He eventually switched back over to Alabama, but man, I had caught the bug, and there was no changing or swapping sides for me. So
Well, I too am trying to figure out why he was an Auburn fan, but he saw the light. He came
Right.
back home. It was just a beautiful picture of the parable of the son that left the family, but then came back.
Right, and he
It's
corrupted me
exactly
along the way.
what-
I got
Yeah,
it.
yeah. But you're still stuck over there with the rest of the Auburn people. Corey on the podcast is actually an Auburn fan, so he's probably hating that he's not getting to hear this. And then me and Daniel are Alabama fans. And now,
Hey,
unless you're
man,
from
well-
Alabama, listeners probably don't care. So,
Yeah, that's right.
tell
Probably
us
not.
tell us a little bit about your family.
Man, I have a beautiful family. So I'll start with, man, I was raised in a very good household. When I say good, it was just that good. It was my parents. We didn't go to church. We didn't do anything having to do with Jesus at all. And so we moved here, and that same buddy who got me to root for Auburn was the one who invited me to church. And so through a process of events, eventually asked Christ to come into my life. And so my whole family made that decision and was baptized. And so my parents were always, as they just turned more towards Christ, we turned more towards Christ. Man, I will just say I have had an amazing set of parents in my life, and eventually met my wife. I've been married for 7.5 years now. She is the most beautiful, wonderful woman that I've ever known, and so we have two great kids. I got a 4-year-old daughter named Taylor and a 2-year-old son named Colson. So they keep us busy, that is for sure.
I can imagine. So I don't have any kids yet, but I've been married for nearly 5 years now, and just being married is busy enough, and then adding kids to that mix, I imagine it adds a different dynamic.
Yes.
Also, though, I know you've told us that you're the contemporary worship pastor in Opelika, and then you told us about your family. But another thing you do is you travel and play music for events and D-Nows and things of that nature. Kind of just tell us how you got into that and why you continue to do it today, and just anything you want us to know about it.
Yeah, man, I started when I was 12 years old. Our church was putting on a class. At the time, it was Evangelism Explosion, and then it went to Faith Evangelism Strategy is basically what it was. And so I began to learn how to share my faith, and we were a piloting church for that program. And in that role of piloting the program, there were churches who were going to kick it off who would call our pastor and say, hey, can you come and can you speak? And eventually what he got in the habit of doing was bringing a couple folks along with him to give testimonies. And so I would go to these events and kick off things, and I would speak. And so I actually started out as a speaker and not a worship leader. But they would, I'd go and I'd give my testimony, and then the student minister would come up to me or the pastor and say, hey, we'd love to have you back, or can you come do a Wednesday night for us? Can you come speak at a D Now? Can you do our winter ski trip, or summer camp and that kind of stuff? And so kind of evolved and morphed into that. And then as that continued, these same folks who asked me to come speak would say, hey, do you know any good worship leaders? I'd say, well, sure, let me call some of my buddies who, man, love them, but worship leaders, as you know, man, they can just be very artsy, and which means with that creative side of them, they're not great sometimes at returning phone calls or showing up on time. And so it just became a hassle, because when I ask someone to come do an event, I'm really like putting my name behind that, and endorsing that person or that worship leader or that ministry. And it just got to be a hassle. And so I remember sitting down one day and I was just praying. And I was like, hey, God, if you will give me the talent and the ability to just be able to play and sing, we'll just lead worship. I'll just start leading worship myself. And so that's kind of where it morphed. And the funny thing now is I started out speaking, and I still do a good bit of speaking. But honestly, the thing I feel like God has really called us to and really brought the increase is leading worship. So that's kind of the process of how I got into it. And they told me that I wouldn't be doing it. It was fine when I was a kid and I was 12 or I was in high school or whatever as that went on. I was told once you grow up and you're not a cute little kid anymore, the opportunities will stop. And here I am years later. I'm 34 now, and still going, and God's brought the increase, and He's blessed, and so we just continue to be obedient.
Amazing how God kind of works things together and works them out. And just so that the listeners know, and they may be curious at this point, I know Ryan because he's actually coming and playing a youth event that I had the joy of planning. But excited about that event. I'm glad that Chris Honeycutt knew you and kind of made that connection.
Yeah, okay.
And then got to be able to be on the podcast now. So there's a few questions we ask everybody that comes on here. And the first one is, tell us Christ. I know you kind of alluded at it a minute ago, and you told us about that one friend that was an Auburn fan for a little bit, but shared the gospel with you. Kind of tell us how you come to Christ in a little more detail, but also, if you would, after that, tell us how you ended up in ministry.
Yeah, okay. So my buddy got me rooting for Auburn, and at one point invited me to Vacation Bible School. Had never been before. And we went, and I had a blast. I'd never been to church before, period. And so after that, I went home, and I think there was just an excitement. My brother went with me. They invited both my brother and I. And so we went home. We were just so excited about it, and sitting down in front of Mom and Dad, chatting with them and saying, hey, it's so much fun. We want to go to church. This is a church that we really love and enjoyed. And they were great parents, and they said, hey, we want to go and see what this church is all about and what's going on there. And I think we just really built some healthy relationships during that time with some families. And so it just ended up being a beautiful thing. And my family all accepted Christ. And I went, it was a Methodist church. I went through confirmation. And I prayed a prayer, and the typical story, we hear so many people talk about now of, I prayed a prayer and I didn't mean it. I didn't really know what I was praying. It wasn't a heart thing. It was just words that I was repeating from someone who's leading me in a prayer. And so kind of went years down the road, and I went to a conference. I was probably 11, 12 years old when this happened. Jay Strack was in Montgomery, Alabama, and I was down at the Civic Center there, and he gave the invitation. I don't remember the message, but I just remember this pulling and tugging on my heart that I couldn't explain, which hindsight obviously is the Holy Spirit. But he gave the invitation. I was all the way in the back of the convention center, but I was one of the first people down front. I mean, as soon as he said come forward and gave that invitation, I was gone. And somebody took me in a back room and they just had a counseling type moment with me. They just asked me, said, tell us, why you came forward. And I said that I don't really know why I came forward. I just know that I want to know God better, is how I phrased it. And so I got, not a whole lot happened there, but I got a call from a local pastor, Taylor Road Baptist Church. Joe Godfrey was the name of the pastor, and he called and he said, "Hey Ryan, can I come by and see you tonight?" And so, of course, I asked Mom's permission because I'm a young kid, and Mom said that'd be absolutely fine. And I remember sitting on the couch with Joe Godfrey, and he opened up his Bible and he explained to me about a relationship with the Lord, and that Jesus loved me and he died on the cross for me, and that blood paid the price for my sin. And I began to understand, and I sat there and I prayed a prayer for the second time, but for the first time I understood what I was praying. And so it would be a couple years later that I would get baptized, but I made that decision sitting there on my couch, and I have kind of maybe what you would consider an obsessive personality. When I decide that I'm going to do something, I'm just all in and really focused and really passionate about it. And that same is true for my relationship with the Lord. Once I made that decision, it was just complete passion for serving Him and being obedient and fostering that relationship with Him. And I had some really great godly people around me that helped encourage that. And so when I was a kid, I plugged into our student ministry, and our student minister was good about just giving some of us responsibilities in serving Christ. And so I was kind of placed on a leadership team for our church and for our student ministry at the time. And within that, started speaking and traveling. And out of that, just never really, some people say that they have a moment where they felt just called, just the skies parted and they just knew that God was calling them to ministry. I don't have that. I just kind of, through a process of being obedient to Christ, just knew that's what He wanted me to do, and that calling was there. And it really, honestly, was never in question. I took my first church job, a summer intern at a church, and I would speak every Wednesday night and organized our Wednesday night programs at First Baptist Columbiana Student Services, organized those. And so I did that for years, but I was 15 years old when I took that job. And then pastored my first church when I was 17. And so it was a church plant, and we grew, and I was on staff at that student ministry from my first job. I was pastoring a church. I was helping coach a wrestling team. I was on the road traveling, doing the camps and conferences, that kind of stuff, and doing school full time. So my senior year and my freshman year, and a little bit into my sophomore year of college, was doing that pastoral position at the church, and stepped down from that just as it got bigger. Then really, I just went to him and I said, "Listen, you guys need someone who can put in and pour in more time." And so I think that's a testimony, not at all to my capabilities or anything from me, but first of all to God and what He was doing, but second of all to the team that He had established there at the church. They were just capable, and they were passionate, and they were wonderful folks, and that church is doing some amazing things. And so, kept doing ministry at churches through college, and then my home church hired me right just before I graduated to come on staff there. And so that's kind of been my journey. And so I ended up at First Baptist Opelika. I was traveling, did a men's conference for a friend that I got to know through the years just doing ministry and our relationship. He just said, "Hey man, First Baptist Opelika is looking for a contemporary worship minister. Are you interested?" And I knew nothing about the church, and I said, "Hey man, is it a good church? Is it a healthy church?" And he said, "Absolutely, it's a great church." And so took a phone call with the executive pastor here. Was the first phone call I had, and went pretty quick because it was just a great fit for my family, and I would love to think for the church as well. But that's been my journey in getting plugged in and ministry and vocation and what I do now.
Man, I couldn't imagine starting off in ministry so young. I was fairly young. I was 19, but imagining starting younger than that. I look back on my first year and I look at all the mistakes I made then, and I think about if I would have started much before then, the mistakes probably would have been a lot more. And that's probably not the case for you, but that was the case for me at least.
Oh
But
yeah, there's some really bad moments. Yeah, absolutely. And you learn from experience. And so
that's right.
it amazes me that some of these ministers who are veterans and have been in it for years, you really have to understand the eternal perspective of investing and training people and discipling, because I sit there and I think about Tim Hebson, who was a student minister at First Baptist Columbiana, hiring a 15-year-old to come in and trusting me to do some things, knowing
Yeah.
that I would make some massive, horrible mistakes, and continuing to mentor me and teach me and love me through that process. And so yeah, it's absolutely amazing. But yeah, I've made plenty of mistakes for sure.
The next question I have is the second question that we ask everybody on here, and that is the kind of the theme of the podcast is an everyday minister. And so the question we always ask is, how would you define an everyday minister?
Man, I think an everyday minister is someone who understands that there is no time off. Everyday minister understands that every moment of every day is an opportunity to minister. And it's a funny concept that we would say, obviously it makes sense to us that we would think from the perspective of, I ministered, the love of Christ to people. But honestly, from a worship leader's perspective, thinking about every moment, what are we doing when people aren't watching? And do we take that opportunity to minister to the Lord? I'm standing on stage and I'm leading worship. It's not just about conveying to those people and placing in a position where they can worship the Lord, but it's also my opportunity to minister and worship the Lord from where I stand. And so I don't get time off from that. My relationship with Jesus is not one where I get to take a break because I'm tired. It's a commitment to every moment of every day, including and especially the things that are not public knowledge, the thoughts, and working, as Scripture says, to hold those thoughts captive. And I think when we think of ministers, we tend to mentally go to the big moments where we're on stage or we're preaching a message or something like that. But the truth is, I think those effective everyday ministers are the folks who understand that, man, it's the small moments. It's the small moments where I continue to serve and be obedient to Christ. And I'm a minister in the moments where no one's watching, but I'm still a minister. And those moments, those small things, prepare us for the big moments. I think those get us ready and prepare us for the times when we are on stage or we have something, what people would consider to do something big for God, be on stage, be in front of people. I think that's made possible because we have been obedient in the moments where we didn't get any recognition or we didn't get any encouragement, and behind closed doors when nobody knew about it, we still said, hey, I need to be careful of my thoughts or my actions here. I need to be careful of what I do in my off time, or if I'm out of town and I have an interaction with a person, I'm not going to be rude, because that's not the example that I want to set for Christ. So I don't know. When we say everyday minister, those are just some of the thoughts that come to mind.
Man, I think you hit the nail on the head with the idea that what we do in private has to flow into what we do on the stage, because in all reality, we've seen many people fake ministry at times, and I'm not going to name anyone, but I think everybody may have somebody that they think of in that moment. But eventually, what we do know is that that's going to come out. And me being completely transparent with the listeners, there's many of times where if it wasn't for my relationship with Christ in the private, then I wouldn't have continued to do what I do in ministry now. And so I think that was a perfect answer for what an everyday minister is. So I'm really curious. Me and you have not talked about this yet, so I think this is going to be a fun conversation. Is what exactly is a worship pastor, a contemporary worship pastor? And then a second question with that is, do y'all have a traditional worship pastor on staff, or how does that dynamic look at your church?
Yeah, so at the church that I serve at, First Baptist Opelika, there are two of us on staff who are worship leaders, and that's all we do. We have other people in areas who lead worship for different services, but as far as vocational ministers who just do worship, there's two of us, and so one of us does the traditional / blended service. So that's going to be full choir. It's going to be some hymns. It's going to be some contemporary songs. I mean, there is a blended feel there with kind of piano and organ and an orchestra. And so we run 2 services with traditional blended on Sunday mornings, and then we do 2 contemporary services. And I have a praise team that's 5 or 6 vocalists on stage, and then a full band with drums and keys and electric guitars and acoustics and bass, that kind of thing. So that's what worship looks like at our church. So I hope that answers your question.
No, that definitely does. I'm at a church of about 30, and so we have a worship pastor, but
Yeah.
lucky to have him. And so
Yeah.
it's just a different dynamic than what I'm used to, and really what I've ever seen. But it's interesting nonetheless. I think it can work well together, and I'm sure it does for you all. So, do you all have a certain time of the year or special events where y'all work together on the worship, deciding things and doing things together?
Yeah, there are a couple things that we do. We try to coincide and work together if we're doing services, and we've done joint services before where, my team will come in and work with maybe the choir and that kind of thing and try to complement what he's doing. Brian, our traditional blended worship leader. So there is some working together. But for the most part, honestly, we do keep things separate for the sake of we have so many people who just desire different styles, and so there are a couple moments that we do come together and make things happen and pull off kind of a community worship. But for our church, we found that it's really effective, that our folks enjoy just different styles and that kind of thing, and both congregation is really supportive of, say your traditional blended folks are very supportive of contemporary and vice versa. I mean, I think a great appreciation and understanding for, as Paul said, all things to all people, that we just have some different options. And if one thing will reach somebody, then, hey, we become that so that we can reach more people for the gospel.
That's amazing to see a church willing to do that, because for so long, that was one of the biggest things, that the worship wars is what we called it, and people arguing over one or the other. And I think it's good that y'all have found a good system of how to work together and, like you said, provide for all people in that area. So,
Yeah.
a big question I have for
Well, and
you,
I think, and
go ahead.
James, let me mention this too, and this is really cool along this line of and vein of thought. I think it's a big testimony to the congregation here at First Baptist, because we can attempt to do stuff, and a lot of churches try. I mean, like you said, they're worship wars, and you've got ministry staffs who are trying to do things together and work things out, but the complaining just gets so great and so huge that it's tough for them to be, are we going to pour our energy and effort into something that doesn't work? And, one of the first weeks that I was here on staff, our executive pastor told me the story of, in contemporary worship, we had an elderly lady who walked in, and she sat down kind of off to the side, about 3 or 4 rows back. And he walked up to her, our executive pastor did, and he said, "Ma'am, do you like," he knows her very well, and he says, "You're in the wrong service. Your service is at 11 o'clock. And her response was, she goes, "Oh, I know, but I just wanted to come in here and support our contemporary ministry." And what she's saying is, this isn't really my thing. It's not my cup of tea, as we may say. But she understood of what was going on in the ministry there, and so just wanted to, even though she wasn't crazy passionate about it, she just wanted to come in and show her support. And so that's the kind of people that we have here, and I love that there are those folks out there. And of course, we have the folks that would never do that. But I think just a testimony to our folks that they allow us as staff to take a little bit of liberty to work together, because you're right, it does cause some very, very severe wars within the body of the church.
Man, it's encouraging to hear when a church, not only in this area, but overall, just whatever it may be, that works well together and, seeks after the Lord together for what he may have. And it may be something where they have to compromise a lot, or just, forget their own thoughts and do what the Lord has. Now, that's encouraging to hear. So one thing that I'm really curious about is, as a pastor, speaking with a worship pastor, really, how do you go about choosing songs in order of service for your Sunday morning worships?
We try to theme it as much as possible. So if we have, like right now, we have our folks who are actually going through a Bible study that was presented, oh gosh, years ago, but is so effective, and so we're doing in order to really bring our church together and unite. It's called Master Life. Probably a lot of listeners out there have heard of that. We're taking our whole church through that. So Sunday mornings, he's not preaching straight out of Master Life. We're leaving that for kind of the smaller groups that we've set up, the small groups. But out of that comes a very specific theme, and so right now that's our theme. And so we take right now is the vine and the branches, and if a man remains in me and I in him, he will bear much fruit. Apart from me, he can do nothing. And so when I have that theme, it allows me to go in and to pick some songs. A couple weeks ago, we did Foundation. So obviously with that, if we're talking about Jesus Christ as a foundation, we may do a contemporary version of Cornerstone. So, I think a song is all-encompassing. I think the beauty of music is we don't just look at one aspect of it, but the job of the worship leader is to take into consideration the entirety of the song, the feel of it, the tempo, the melody, the words, the lyrical depth. We went through a time in Christian contemporary music where everyone laughed because the words and the lyrics were just so shallow, and they don't compare to the traditional hymns. Well, there's some things coming out now lyrically that are very deep, and so I try to take into consideration, the art of it is keep one eye on the Lord, that we want to be watching Him and we're attentive to that. But we also, in one respect too, we have to keep one eye on our congregation. Because it'll work for one congregation and it's a Christ-centered song and it's beautiful and it's wonderful and the Spirit of God is in it, doesn't mean that it's going to work for your congregation. And so, there are songs that we'll choose and we'll do that are not great and they don't go over well. That maybe another church, we hear at a conference or something and we love it, and for whatever reason it doesn't work for our congregation. I'm not going to twist their arm. I'm not going to, put them in a headlock and go, you will worship and you will enjoy it. We're not going to do that. We're going to take our folks where they're at, and what works for them and what's effective for them. And so that's the beauty of being on staff for a length of time and being able to understand where they're at and what they enjoy stylistically. And we take that and we meet people there. Stylistically, and then moving forward as time goes on and we gain trust, we can take a little bit of liberty and stretching our folks and trying styles and things that are a little bit different, a little bit out of our comfort zone, but to say, hey, you know what, God is a God of continual change. He doesn't change, but we do, and we're in the process of changing. And so sometimes it's okay to say, hey, we're going to try a song that's a little bit different and maybe a little bit edgier than we've done before, something like that. We did a while back, Lift Your Head Weary Sinners. We introduced that song, David Crowder, and it's a very youthful, it's got that southern rock, so a lot of our older adults like it too. But that kind of stuff comes over time, and as a worship leader, gaining the trust of the congregation, them understanding and knowing that you're not there for a performance and a show, but you're there to minister. But at the same time, ministry can be fun, and it's okay to celebrate and clap and have fun in the sanctuary. Not all effective Christian songs have to be slow power ballads. We can do some different things, but those things come over time. So all those things factor in and affect how we choose songs for Sunday morning for the congregation.
That's awesome. Me and my worship pastor, we really do it together most of the time. He really picks stuff out, and then we kind of talk about it, and sometimes it's communicating, directly about it. And we have a different approach, and it's probably not something you haven't heard. It just works well for us and for our church. It's we really spell out the gospel through the service itself. So the first song would be a song declaring who God is. The second song is kind of expressing our need for God, our sinfulness, things of that nature. The third would be an idea of who Christ is, what he's accomplished on the cross, and all of that. And the fourth would be a song of thanksgiving. And I know I said a song and all of that. Sometimes it might be one of those areas. It might be a prayer or a scriptural reading and things of that nature. But I love hearing different approaches of how they work well for different ministries and different churches. I mean, I think sometimes we get caught up on it has to be one way or another. But I think you would agree with me on this, is that as long as you're singing with a thankful heart, as we see in Colossians 3:16, and then also, songs that are grounded in God's word, I think the way we approach it can differ on location. It's just a matter of, our heart behind what we do.
Right, absolutely.
So we're getting kind of long, so I want to wind it down by asking one more question, and then we'll get into the plugs of the week. And after that, we'll give you an opportunity to tell everybody how to find your website and music and whatnot. The next question I have, and I think this is just really important one to ask, especially in your context, it seems like you have a lot of volunteers that play a part in the music and on Sunday morning worship. And so I'm really curious of how you go about equipping your volunteers, but also how do you help disciple those that are volunteering in the music ministry?
Yeah, so we have probably 25-ish, 30-ish volunteers within the worship ministry, in the contemporary worship ministry. So that doesn't get into like the traditional blended. And it also doesn't include sound or lyrics or anything like that. We have folks on staff that completely handle those responsibilities. So the beautiful thing about my position is I'm just worried about contemporary worship. So, we have an audition process that allows somebody to come in. They do a full audition for us. And so through that, we get to know them musically, what they're capable of, and kind of diagnose and go through what they need to work on. And so we fully do that. But then also part of the audition is we get to know them as a person spiritually, them, their family, where they are with Christ. Do they even know Christ? What are the things spiritually they need to work on? Within our contemporary ministry, we are not the end-all, be-all of discipleship for them. And so a huge part of what we encourage them to do is obviously they're looking at volunteering for the church, contemporary worship ministry. That's why they're auditioning. But we really encourage them to plug into a small group, to find areas in the church to not only serve, but to plug in and be discipled by folks. We place a lot of emphasis on our small groups and really those relationships and connecting with people. So as far as our discipleship within the contemporary ministry itself, we do a Devo at the beginning, and as we began Master Life, our folks came to me and they said, hey, can we do a worship ministry contemporary? Can we during practice or before practice do a small group with Master Life? And it just really was not conducive to the time frame that we had. And so I really encourage them. I said, guys, we can try to do that, and we can blaze through it and not really give it the time that it deserves. But what I would encourage you to do is to plug in with your Sunday school group or with a small group to do that. And so that's one of the processes that we've begun as a church, as discipleship. I think I try to be real careful. It's easy for us as ministries to take on the independent silo mentality of we're going to do it all ourselves, instead of looking at, hey, instead of each ministry working independently, let's all collectively work together to make something happen. And so one ministry is not completely responsible for every aspect of investing in a person's life and teaching and training them, but the entirety of the church joins together. And we don't want our folks to plug into just one aspect of the church. We wanted them to be connected to the entire body. And so we're really busy about utilizing the resources of the entirety of the church. And so that's kind of the focus and how we gear and how we try to develop them spiritually. And then musically, if there's things that they need to work on, we take steps to make that happen. Just had a guy who auditioned a couple weeks ago. He's not ready for the stage yet, but we're putting him through a process of where he's coming on stage with us during rehearsals, and we're talking through what he needs to go home and work on every week so that we can prepare him for the stage. Has an incredible heart. We just need to develop a little bit of the music talent. So busy training and working with him. But those are some of the things that we do in a nutshell.
Man, two things I just love what you said was the idea of your volunteers for worship being in small groups with other people. one, your reasoning was it would be hard for y'all to do it in the time frame that y'all have. But what I love about that though is, the idea of leading worship, and it's, you're leading those in the church as a whole. And so they have the opportunity to be with the people of the church in those small groups. And I'm
That's
really
right.
encouraged by that, because so often we do see this, and especially larger churches, when you have that option, is you see where, like you said, one side of ministry will kind of group together and do everything with themselves. And really it tends to be disconnected from the body of Christ, and kind of lose focus on what you should be doing. And then, so I'm really encouraged by that. And then also, all right, so love hearing about how you work with your volunteers and things of that nature. One question I want to ask you real quick: would you give one encouragement to the worship pastors out there that may be listening?
Oh gosh, just one.
One,
Pay attention to
5,
detail.
30.
Yeah,
Say that
well,
again.
I mean, gosh, we could sit here forever and talk about just little things to make us more effective. And a couple things that come to mind. First of all, continue to remind yourself that you're doing it for the Lord. Before I go on stage, one of the things I've been telling myself, and I just repeat to myself, is Ryan, you've been called by God to do this. Because my abilities are minimal. I don't have the strength to do it on my own. But I remind myself that God's called me to this, and if God's called me to it, then He will equip me for the task at hand. And so,
Yeah.
you may be dealing with a whole lot of naysayers and negativity. Everybody has opinions, and they're very quick to share them. But I would say just to remind yourself, God has called you to this, and He's going to equip you to handle it and give you the strength to do it. And so all those times and moments that you're discouraged, definitely lean on Him. But I repeat to myself, hey, God has called me to this. So that's just kind of on the forefront of my mind if I was to give them one piece of advice right now.
I wanna add one, and it's what I tell my worship pastor all the time. Is when it comes to playing the music and singing, you're not going to be perfect every time at it. You're not going to perform, 100% every time when it comes to that. But the beauty of it is that in every area of ministry, that's the case. A preacher's not going to preach his best sermon every week, and
Right.
because it's a fallen and broken world. So don't beat yourself up if you make mistakes or do something wrong, or say the wrong word at the wrong time in the song. That's just a reality of this life. So, Ryan, at the end of each podcast, we take the opportunity to give a plug of the week. What is your plug for the audience today?
Yeah, the plug is one of the books that when I first started doing worship ministry, it was one of the books that I read, and it's called The Heart of the Artist. It's by Rory Noland. And man, it's a great book, and it really gets down to the heart that as a worship leader or as an artist that we need to have, and the perspective that we need to have, keeping things, within the eternal, perspective in leading worship, and just how we approach songs and how we approach our people and how we handle ministry. So, The Heart of the Artist by Rory Noland.
Awesome. I have to check that one out myself. Even though I would say I'm not an artist, I think it can kind of still speak to me.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then my plug of the week is one that I've said on here before, but as we're talking about worship ministry, it's one I want to recommend, and it is Christ-Centered Worship by Brian Chappell. Fantastic book. It kind of gives us the history of how the church, since the early church, has done worship services, but also kind of helps us decide on different formats and different ways of doing things as a worship service. So check out both of those. If you're going to pick one to check out, I would pick Ryan's, because he is a worship pastor and he knows much more about it than I do. So Ryan, as we get ready to get off of here, as we said earlier, you travel, you do events and things of that nature. And so if anybody just wants to hear your music or get in contact with you and possibly follow you on social media, whatever the case may be, how can they do that?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook, Ryan John, and then Instagram is RyanJohn416, and then just the website. That's probably the easiest thing to do. If all else fails, RyanJohn.com, and actually on the website are links to the social media that we have. So just RyanJohn.com. We've got music, some videos, dates that are on there, that kind of stuff. So yeah, RyanJohn.com. Check it out.
So if you don't mind me asking, have you done any music of your own or any CDs or anything of that nature?
Yes, I've got 2 albums that are posted on the website. We've got them on iTunes, and so Spotify, all that kind of stuff will have the albums. You can look up Ryan John. The first album that we did is Beautiful Scars, and the second that we did which is a little bit more worship stuff, is Overcame the World. So we've got those two actually on the website.
Okay, awesome. Y'all should go check that out and kind of just listen to his music. I have not listened to the albums yet, but I'm gonna have to get on there. I did watch and listen to his videos that are on his website before we contacted him for the event. But Ryan, thank you so much for being on the podcast this evening. Is there anything you want to add before we get off of here?
Man, I just want to say thanks for the opportunity. Man, I love serving Christ, and man, I hope this podcast has been an encouragement to y'all. But man, just stay faithful, and know that God loves you. That's it, man.
Well, to the listeners out there, we thank you for listening today. And me and the two co-hosts will be praying for you and your ministries, however you may be ministering in churches and in your vocation. But this has been the Everyday Ministry Podcast, and we're a podcast where everyday ministers get together to discuss ministry.
If you're encouraged by what you hear, please go like our Facebook page, share the episodes, and rate the podcast on iTunes. Don't forget that a new episode drops every first and third Mondays. Our prayer is that these episodes are an encouragement to you and that you would be faithful in the ministry that God has placed you in.
I'm lost without your love. This life can feel so cold, but every time I call your name, you take my hand and heal the pain. You take me back again. Your love shines in the dark, breaking the hardest heart. The love of Christ shall know no end. Stretch out your mighty hands, heal our streets and lands. Your kingdom's reign will know no end. Rescue me again. The day is drawing near when tears shall be no more. No force of hell can stand. Unleash your grace on us. But every time I call your name, you take my hand and heal the pain. You take me back again. Your love shines in the dark, breaking the hardest heart. The love of Christ shall know no end. Stretch out your mighty hand, heal our streets and lands. Your kingdom's reign will know no end. Rescue me again. Every time I call your name, you take my hand and heal the pain. You take me back again. Shines in the dark, breaking the hardest heart. The love of Christ shall know no end. Stretch out your mighty hand, heal our streets and lands. Your kingdom's reign will know no end. Love shines in the dark, breaking the hardest heart. The love of Christ shall know no